Good evening. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming out, you brave people. Really lovely to see you, and grateful that you're here, and very much looking forward to this event tonight. Phong Bui and Alexander Nagel are here. Thank you guys for making the trip up from New York. What a treat for us. They're gonna chat for a while, and then we'll be delighted to take questions, open it up to a conversation. I think what we'll try to do when we get to questions is I'll come back up here and then I'll walk around the room and give you the microphone so everybody can hear everybody's questions. And this event is being recorded by our terrific community TV station, BCTV. And so if we use the microphone, then you'll be heard on the recording as well. A few quick thank yous before I turn it over to these guys. This has been a very special experience having this exhibit up that Phong put together for us. And like any museum exhibition, there's really a whole team of people who helped make it happen and who deserve thanks. And I just want to call out just a few of them. Christopher and Vimala Steadman and the Wolf Kahn Foundation provided funding for the exhibition. And we couldn't have done it without their support. So thank you to them. Thank you to our great friend, artist who lives in Putney, Richard Jacobs, who's here tonight, who made the connection between the Brattleboro Museum and Art Center and Phong that ultimately led to this exhibition coming about. Thank you, Richard. I don't think Phong's incredible assistant, right-hand man, co-conspirator, Cal McKeever is here tonight, but I'll thank Cal anyway because he's incredible, and we couldn't have done this without him. And we're so grateful to all of the collectors and institutions and galleries who loaned us these works for the show. So thank you to them as well. Let's say a quick word about Phong and Alex. Alexander Nagel is a brilliant art historian, prolific author. He's a professor at the Institute of Fine Arts at NYU. Has had an area of focus on Renaissance art, but also increasingly in contemporary art as well. And I think if you want to know really something more substantive and more detailed about Alex's really interesting and impressive work, you need to look him up online and read about it because I'm not going to explain it very well. And Phong Bui, our incredible friend, Phong Bui is an artist, and he is the co-founder and publisher and artistic director of the amazing institution, the Brooklyn Rail, which produces this monthly publication, but also that's just the tip of the iceberg. Incredible online programming and curatorial projects, including this one. So Alex, Phong, we're so happy you're here. Thank you for making this trip. Thank you for doing this tonight. And I'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you. Good, yeah. Can you hear me? Good. Thank you, Danny. Well, I'd like to start. Basically, my role here, as I understand it, is to get Phong to talk. The person that is being summoned here in the midst of all these works is an art historian named Meyer Schapiro, who summered not far from here over many decades in the second half of the 20th century. And his work, which we'll get into a little bit, I hope, his art historical work was an extraordinary combination of deep and extremely sensitive analysis of works of art and an affirmation that as deep as one could go into the work of art, the context, the resonant context in which that work was made, in which it functioned, in which it lived over centuries sometimes, also mattered to what it did and what one can say about it. And so in the spirit of Meyer Schapiro, I think context is everything here, or at least a big part of it. And so I'd like to start from a little bit farther out and ask you about the series of shows to which this belong. I think this is the 13th Singing in Unison show.
Yeah.
So what is Singing in Unison? How did it start? And how is this part of that?
It began during the third year of the pandemic. I began rereading these remarkable two-part essays that were published in The Nation 1913. It's called Democracy versus the Melting Pot. That was written by a writer, an older friend of Meyer Schapiro, named Horace Kallen, Kallen. And it's beautifully argued, instead of assimilate all the fluxes of new immigrants that came on the second wave, particularly late 19th century, the turn of 20th century, into the so-called white Christian identity. He proposed a different alternative, meaning, as he gave so many examples, for example, the Germans decided to land in Wisconsin because it reminded them so much of the weather of their own country. So they began to create their own so-called Volksgeist, which is the word that I always need to find refuge to defend my idea of it, meaning folklore, the people's spirit, that including food, dance, and everything else. And the same can be said of right below Wisconsin would be Minnesota, where most Scandinavians found their home there for the similar reason. So instead of accepting them, embracing them, almost like an instrument that have unique sound, that contribute to the symphony, then the symphony is whole. And the symphony is really the idea of liberal democracy in its best representation. So I felt, we were going through this difficult political divisive time. So symphony seemed to me were a productive and very warm way of welcome what was going on today. So Singing in Unison is part of that. It came out from that aspiration. So the first one I did 2.5 years ago with Kahn was essentially bringing artists. It's a big, huge group show where we welcome artists, mostly self-taught, artists in prison, and some vernacular artists, as well as well-known artists and overlooked artists. And that was the first version we did, and it was a real success. People understood the context of why we did that. So this particular is number 13.
Yeah.
It continued to have that dialogue, and very much respectful for each individualistic voice that you see here. People who, have some visibility and then disappear, and then some people were able to sustain. And most of the case, some of them died fairly young. In the case of Bob Thompson, in the case of John Muller, in the case of Gandhi Brody, which is the portrait of the Patriot chef, very end corner of the First War, whose work I admire. So that's how it began.
Right. Yeah, this is a smaller, from the ones that I've seen, they tend to be sprawling, as you say, these exhibitions. This one's a bit smaller, but it has that quality.
Yeah.
The quality of assembling a community on the walls and then assembling a community between the walls. So this is an unusual, I've never seen anything like the phenomenon that is Phong Bui, the phenomenon of the Brooklyn Rail and its resonance in New York and now expanding throughout the world. It's not enough, clearly, to just do a magazine that gets picked up by thousands and thousands of people. There have to be these shows, evidently, and there have to be these events, which are hugely important because the experience that I've had of the Brooklyn Rail phenomenon has been repeatedly an experience of being somewhere, a space created by the magazine and its, various events, and looking around and saying to myself, oh, the community to which I already belong is bigger than I thought it was, which is such an affirmative feeling. And I don't know if this is the first time you visited this show, but even if it is, this is part of the mission.
Yeah.
The conversations that have happened, I've heard from one artist who has a show currently up. Please tell us your name. I've forgotten. I'm sorry. Rick Harlow, who has a show now up and is giving a talk next Sunday about it. Was telling me what an impact this show has had, not just on him, but on the community, because of the kind of work being shown, and I think because of the kind of energy that's being brought, partly by you, partly in a delayed reaction by Meyer Schapiro and Lillian Schapiro. So this is the kind of dynamic that I've started to get used to very happily. So Meyer Schapiro, we're not going to spend the whole time talking about this great art historian, but I think it's important to talk about him a little bit.
Yeah.
This is a scholar who lived through almost the entirety of the 20th century. He was born just a little bit after 1900. He died just a little bit before 2000. And was an extraordinary figure in art history, a specialist in medieval art, wrote his dissertation on Romanesque sculpture, but also very engaged with the contemporary art of his time. He wrote an extremely important essay on the nature of abstract art in the 1930s. He was read by everyone that was interested in art, seemingly. Mm-hmm. There are stories about what it looked like when he had office hours outside his office. Most art history professors, such as me, will have, a few nervous students wondering what they're going to write their thesis on. Outside Shapiro's office at Columbia University were artists with their canvases waiting for an audience with Schapiro so that they could show him their work. Several artists attended his classes, were his students, both at the undergraduate level and at the graduate level, and they form, well, in a way, a kind of summary of New York art in the middle decades of the 20th century. Yeah. People like Alan Capro, very various artists. He was friends with a much larger world of artists. He animated discussion among not only different kinds of artists living in his time, but between those artists and the much older art that he spent a lot of his time studying. He would take artists such as Fernand Léger to the Morgan Library to look at their 13th century Apocalypse manuscript. If you look up Morgan Apocalypse manuscript, I think you'll see why he thought Léger needed to see it. He took Roberto Matta, I think, whose work is right here, to see that same manuscript. It was something that he did when he felt the artists needed to see art that they might otherwise not be exposed to. So an extraordinary figure, and really one of the great art historians to read. it's a rare thing to read him, because it's, on the one hand, completely accessible. I recommend sometime this week just looking up an essay by him. Doesn't matter if it's on medieval art or modern art, and you'll find that the language is completely transparent, engaging. He takes you by the hand, but quickly you're into really deep, profound, fundamental, and complex questions about what it means to be human and what it means to make art. And so I recommend it highly. He was hugely important to me as a student of art history, as just a model of what it could look like to be an art historian. And I've always, in difficult moments, as well as in easier moments, just thought, what would Meyer Schapiro do? How would the next sentence sound if he wrote it? And it usually, I think, made things better for me. Even though I never knew him, I never met him, he was very significant as a kind of spiritual mentor for me. So that's a little bit about Meyer Schapiro. And I think we can get further into him and what he stood for, and how these rooms are, in a way, a kind of emanation of his spirit, by asking Phong about his relationship to Meyer Schapiro. So you met him in 1986.
Yes, in May 1986.
Please tell us how you met him and what were the circumstances.
Yeah, I met him because I was at 1 year postgraduate student at New York Studio School that was found by a painter named Mercedes Matter, a painting in the middle of the somewhat a landscape, leaving a lot of blank canvas exposed. She happened to be a friend of my painting professor in freshman year named Jen Piper, who happened to be the assistant of her father. Her father's name Arthur B. Carles, Carles, a terrific modernist, one of the early American who went to Paris with Joseph Stella, Modern's Hartley, and have studied with Matisse, and very well aware and informed by the Paris school. Instead of coming to New York, most of them would have, he moved back home. It's never a good idea to move back home. You remember that great novel by Thomas Wolfe, Never Go Home? And he became a recluse and an alcoholic. So his fame sunk. But nevertheless, Mercedes was very dynamic. Evidently, she was extremely beautiful. She married to Herbert Matter, a modernist, Bauhaus, graphic designer. But she found the school, New York Studio School, in the late 50s. And that was an attempt to dedicate the practice of painting, drawing, and sculpture. That was what she wanted to do. I think Meyer Schapiro was invited to give some lectures, no more than 4 of them. But because of his fame, she asked whether he would be sitting in an advisory board. Mm-hmm. So in that summer, in May 1986, I was asked by the program director to fetch a painting for a group show. And I was told, as soon as you come to the door, more likely his wife, Dr. Lillian Milgram Shapiro, will be at the door and readily give you the painting. And please thank him, and just go away, because he was very protective of his time. But it just happened that he was at the door, answered the doorbell. And he asked me some question about where I came from. So I told him that I was born in Hue. And he said, yes, where the Tet Offensive happened in 1968. And he became so interested. It turned out that he knew all the generals and the officials up north and south. And that's when he got excited, animated, and that's when he went back, and I can hear his voice. Lillian, there's a Vietnamese young painter that's still in the New York Studio School. Can we invite him for tea? So she came out to the door. She looked at me, inspecting me left and right, upside down, literally for a good 1 minute before accepting me in the house. So we went down to the table in the dining room, sit only 4 people, and we have our tea, and it turned out to be 2 hours long. And that's when I came away with the book that he lent me, 2 volumes of Soren Kierkegaard, Either Or. Why? Because he detected my sorrow, my sadness. And I told him I was reading his famous Fear and Trembling. It's helping me to understand of my disapproval father, who was not at all supportive of my idea of being an artist after having gone to school to become a successful art director, because I was about to go to work for Condé Nast. In any rate, the long story was that it became immediate, solidified friendship, where he told me, please return the book next week. And I look at him and say, can you give me 2 weeks, sir? Because there was 2 volumes.
Either or.
Either or. And I must...
1 week for either, another for
exactly.
or seems reasonable.
It was intense, because I always admired, my college professor, honor professor who taught philosophy. I have a deep interest in philosophy. But that book was complex. So I had to read carefully, and the following 2 weeks, when I returned the book for dinner, it's always at 5 o'clock. And there's a way in which he can ask inquiry about the book without making you feel inadequate. And that become, I would say, a weekly visit. So every week I have to read a book. So that was the education I have had with him. So until he died in March 3, 1996. So that basically I got to know him the last 10 years of his life. Imagine the book that I read, except some summer when I was traveling on a fellowship and moving here and there in Europe. But otherwise, that was a very strong ritual that we had. In other words, Alex knows this, they adopted me like a beloved Jewish grandson they never had. And that's how it was for me too, because no one ever supported me to be an artist.
Yeah. And you were not yet completely decided when you first met him.
Yes.
About being an artist, right? Because you had these other interests. You were reading Kierkegaard. You were thinking about various possible avenues. How did he help you with that?
Well, first of all, I have a strong interest in becoming an art historian. My first traveling fellowship was to study really Florentine art, particularly the works of Paolo Uccello. Uh-huh. I wrote a long thesis on his Tribado San Romano, as some of you may remember. It was commissioned by Lorenzo de' Medici for his bedchamber. And of course, it details so much of the struggle between the Florentine and the Sienese, which I learned at that time when I was there, that Siena would create the first bank in Europe. And the Medici want to mobilize banking system to Florence to support their own ambition as to create the great Florentine Republic. So I had that in mind. I would call Meyer occasionally, and I told him that would it be adequate for me to pursue a career as a scholar, and I was to have a scholarship to go to Columbia.
Right.
But he cryptically said, you have a good mind, but you don't have a temperament as a monk. You don't have monastic temperament. it will be hard for you to achieve that goal, to be a great scholar. So use what you have, your interest, and mobilize it in different way as an artist and something else. But do not pursue to become a scholar.
Yeah.
So that was very important. Someone told you that distinction, tell you that you don't blink an eye and question the motivation.
Right.
I surrender to his wisdom.
Yeah, you did, and you became an artist, but at the same time, you know, a lot of other things had to happen. And in a way, I feel like it's such an interesting mentorship moment, because on the one hand, he focused you, and I think he also allowed for the other part to come out in the way that it should, you know, as organically out of your practice as an artist, a community builder, someone who wants to see conversations happening around art, and then this, you know, which then allows you to read books and, you know, be part of a whole intellectual discussion without going the path from the beginning of the scholar.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know what Nietzsche say. He had that beautiful term, amor fati, mean to love your fate. Some point you have to love your fate. You have to surrender to that fate. You only live once. Right. You know, so I read enough and I follow great figures that I admire for years and years, with the artists, writers, novelists, poets. Right. And that's the key, Alex, because visiting Meyer and Lillian, I would meet their friends. Right. And their friends are not just academic. Their friend was the great philosopher, Sir Isaiah Berlin, the great novelist, Saul Bellow, who actually lived here for quite some time, and Irving Howe, the man who created Dissent magazine, Michael Harrington, who created Socialist Democratic Party, and of course, you know, people like David Shapiro, Gandhi Brody here, Dan Sherry, who's a friend, young friend standing over there, would know some of the story. So it's super broad and wide, that Meyer, you know, and I always fantasize, what an interesting life to live. How can I have that equal interesting life? I just don't care about money. I just never did. I still don't. And I felt like this is my calling. This is my surrender to that love. I wonder there'll be a day where I can recreate that community for my generation and the next generation. Because I felt when I came to New York, all the great figures, the bohemian figure that I read in books, I met some of them, like Allen Ginsberg, who came to my class and give some poetry reading, because my poetry professor, Stephen Berg, was the founding editor of American Poetry Review. So I've met already a few people like Allen Ginsberg who came to give poetry reading in Philadelphia. And I read about the bohemian community through reading books. For example, Dory Aston's book, New York School Cultural Reckoning. What a great book. Or let's say Roger Satak, The Banquet Years. And I always felt like you can't really have a movement by one person, creative movement. There's always a collective, a community artist, poet, novelist, philosopher, arguing over things that they value. So to me, that's something that I felt I need to do some point in my life. So really, you know, it was really nostalgia, but without being nostalgic. Right. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much to say about that. I mean, on the one hand, this show is a curatorial project. It has real coherence. It's a kind of constellation of works that revolve around this remarkable art historian and artist, Meyer Schapiro. That's perfectly fine. But to me, this show, of all the shows that you've curated, is the one that has the autobiographical pulse, and tells us something about how this came into being. Tells us a lot about how a mentor relationship, a quasi-grandson-grandfather relationship, can propel something into the next century that's really important. People have been talking for many years about the decline of New York as the center of art, and you can debate that all you want. But one thing that's certainly happened in the last 25 years, there's been a lot of celebration around the magazine's 25 years over the past year, is that a new sense of community has emerged because of this magazine and the shows and the various events that is so affirmative. It really, it's sort of revelatory. Like all the ingredients were there, but they didn't recognize themselves as part of something until they had a chance to. So talk about a long-lasting, impactful influence of a mentor. I'm not saying it's all down to Meyer Schapiro, but there is a story one can tell. One of the things that I noticed when I first started to sort of interact with the magazine 8 years ago, maybe 10 years ago now, was, this is an environment, both in the pages of the magazine and in the various events and shows, where the generations mix, which is kind of rare. In New York, it tends to be kind of stratified, the generational problem. And I thought, that's interesting. The first issue that I contributed to was a whole issue devoted to the artist Ad Reinhardt. I thought, wow, a whole issue of a magazine devoted to an artist. That's great, And someone asked me to contribute, and I thought, okay, there's going to be all of the luminous minds of the New York art world writing ponderous and complex and interesting things about Ad Reinhardt. I'm not going to try to do that. So I just wrote, 10 lines in the Ad Reinhardt style. These repetitive poetic lines, and I wrote them about style because I felt he had interesting things to say about style. So style is, and I wrote a number of sentences, style is this or that. Can't remember them. And then I submitted them, and I said, I would like you to publish them in my handwriting, like an image of this thing, this image. That
Physical.
And not a peep, not a problem. It was just, okay. And then it was published, and I thought, that's an interesting magazine. This is really something extraordinary. Anyway, that's just a little anecdote.
By the way, it was put together in 1 month.
That Ad Reinhardt issue, Well, I didn't know about that.
But. It was in the midst of our Come Together Surviving Sandy exhibition in October 2013. I got a phone call from Rita Reinhardt and the daughter Anna, and they were sharing the news that they actually have moved from Pace to Davis Warner. And they have approached my friend Robert Storr to curate the show. And they wanted to do something radical, like a whole archive of Reinhardt writing, his correspondence with friends, people wrote about him, making it available. And the first person I thought was perfectly fit for being the editor of the issue was Barbara Rose, the legendary Barbara Rose, who wrote the first book of his writing in the early 80s. So that was it. She was the editor, and I enlisted a young PhD candidate, Alex Bacon, to support her. And it was so intense. They came to the site of the Sandy Show, by the way, that was 1,100 square feet, and I did it in 2 months.
Okay. No wonder they didn't complain about my contribution. they had no time.
No, it's not true. It's not true.
Ad Reinhardt, student of Meyer Schapiro, you can see 2 postcards to Meyer Schapiro from Ad Reinhardt in his amazing handwriting. It's lovely, blocky handwriting. Contentious, at least one of them, quite contentious, funny postcard to his former teacher in the small room with the books and texts and things. But the point I was getting to, one of them is the other thing that struck me, other than the greatness of doing a whole issue of nothing but Reinhardt, was, oh, this is like supposedly a hip, cool magazine that's super contemporary and got a lot of young people around it. Whole issue on Ad Reinhardt. It was a combination that it just seemed quite unusual. And it's persistent. There's this, partly because of the imprint of Meyer Schapiro, I think, the respect for that moment, there's this sense of claiming continuity with this apogee, these decades of, this high point of activity in New York, claiming a continuity between that and what's going on now. In contrast to so much of what had been sort of taught in New York, about rejecting, that period for its many faults, its patriarchy or, its focus on painting, for whatever reason. The rail was finding a way to say, yeah, sure, one can criticize, but there's also this great tradition of dissent and independent-mindedness and political engagement and whatever else you wanted to connect to. And I thought that's really interesting. And then I've also had occasion to think, I don't know if I've ever shared it with you, that it's partly possibly your background, the sense of like, we respect our elders. There's that strong sense that I think you infuse the magazine with. And it doesn't have to make the magazine, it doesn't at all make the magazine feel like it's stuck in the past. I mean, exactly the opposite is the feeling. There's this kind of healthy, as I say, cohabitation of the generations, dialogue across the decades that feels just right.
Well, you mentioned about Leger, who asked Meyer, I only have one day tomorrow. Is there any work of art that you recommend me? That's when he brought to see the Beatus manuscript. And it's so interesting how a decade later, Leger began to adopt those flat, bright color bands that go across.
It's pretty clear.
It's very clear. And then eventually, the whole late divers have no spatial orientation. You can flip them any side, So there are inherent gradual impact, but it's all based on trust. And also the other thing I would like to add to that is the continuum of perception and the making of it, of art. There's no separation, there's never been broken. So I think the idea of Meyer introduced to Leger of the Beatus manuscript is no more, no less than me recognizing someone like Reinhardt, who I felt at the time, the height of what my late friend Walter Robinson called zombie formalism.
Right.
There's so many young artists trying to create formal dialogue in the pictorial painting, but really not well, endowed and have greater knowledge of the beginning of abstraction, particularly the discourse of beginning of minimalism. And so I thought it was such a great opportunity to dedicate that issue. It's very interesting about, I taught for a while, and it's never good to criticize your student. So what's the option? So you got to be sneaky. You have to find a way to, because I grew up in Vietnam, I'm aware of that guerrilla welfare, You don't look directly, you look different ways, just like Perseus. In order to, to slay the head of Medusa, he had to look at the reflection of the seal, which he borrowed from the goddess Athena. It's a indirect vision, not direct vision. So I'm always thinking all the way of escape the convention of being perceived in one way or another way. Mm-hmm. In other words, I felt deeply about how to extrapolate and mobilize our own freedom. Because, Timothy Snyder terrifically say, free people are extremely very predictable to themselves, but unpredictable to those who want to conform them. Unfree people are extremely unpredictable to themselves, but predictable to the rulers. So I always felt that something that I'm being aware of, and I think art had that subversive meaning. It always had. It's just because, for you take example, you and I was talking about Philip Guston. That painting was made in 1968. So that's a year after his Jewish show, 1967, where he was trying to dismantle his early great paintings of what we would call abstract impressionism. And he's really trying to shift gears, dealing with his own struggle as an artist. And I think that was a time when he began to embrace minimalist idea. That's what we call the alphabet painting. An object can be reductive into a single one-shot painting, probably take no more than 30 an hour, but it has to come out, and then it's very reductive, just black and white and red. That was it. And he went on to do that for a good 3 years until he arrived at much more monumental narrative painting, grotesque figurative painting that was completely attacked by the New York art community. I mean, you remember Rio and Kramer attack on that show, the infamous show at Marlboro in winter 1970?
I think Guston took a flight out of New York.
Yes.
That night.
Yeah.
So that he wouldn't have to face what he knew was coming.
Yeah.
I think he went to Italy or something.
Yeah. It's true. He was at the Academy at Rome. That's right.
But here's the typical thing. In how many shows do you get a Guston and a Rothko next to artists that you've never heard of, that I've never heard of? Many people, who are pretty interested in this stuff have never heard of. Every one of the shows that you've done has that quality. There's a gangly kind of quality to them that is, the kind of thing that an artist might do, but not a well-bred curator. Mm-hmm. And then guess what? Between the walls, in the spaces between the walls, the same thing happens. You have, these august figures, of the New York scene, Sean Scully, or Schnabel, or David Reed, or whoever it might be, just standing there and kind of relieved not to be in a particular kind of context, but just to be surrounded by a lot of young people who are hanging out. If you go to David Reed's Gagosian show uptown at the opening, it's not like that. It's ordered in a different way. Yeah. And so that's the difference. And you've got it going on here, partly as a reflection of you, but partly, of course, as a reflection of Meyer Schapiro, yes, who lived, in this constellation. This is how actual lives get lived. Yeah. You encounter artists of different kinds and you appreciate them for different reasons. Yeah. Maybe you appreciate them partly because of their personal qualities, but maybe you really enjoy what they have to offer, and then they don't make it into the art history books the way other ones do. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, I mentioned Soren Kierkegaard early. He says something very funny. He say, once you label me, you negate me. And I think in our culture, in our popular culture, have tendency to label people. It's a terrible, lazy way of put people in some boxes, in certain category, certain space, which is so damaging to culture as a whole. And I want to open that up. You know, I remember around 2006, Richard Serra called me up and on the phone. And we'd already met a few times. I already had interviewed him. And once you know Richard well, he talked very warmly and sometimes passionately without all the formality, because Richard can talk super well verbally. He's brilliant, as he could write, as we all know. But I remember he called me up and he said, "You sneaky bastard." I said, "What do you mean, Richard?" He said, "You are recreating the community that has no demarcations. The community that fed me without Richard Serra being absorbed, making stupid experimental films, through Jonas Makers, through Michael Snow, without having spent time with Trista Brown, you know, Joan Jonas, the Justin dance community, where these a group of dance community who refuse to dance on the stage because it's owed so much to the extension of Martha Graham modern dance. Nevertheless, it's still part of the European concept of ballet. So he made that association. These people wanted to dance on the floor, on the garage, on everywhere. Eliminating the state, to him, is the equivalent of eliminating the pedestal in sculpture. So you can see people like that can think that way, you know? So I think he acknowledged the rail is a firmament, the fertile ground, where a poet can read an art review or an artist interview. An artist can read a book review or original fiction and be inspired by it. So one of the most frustrating things when I came to Williamsburg, meeting a group of friends, most of them were graduate students, some of them was doing their doctoral thesis on some obscure project thesis. For example, gender study of San Francisco in 1950. And when you ask about the existence of city-like books or poets, you know, like Diana Prima or Robert Duncan, they have no idea who these people were. So it's very, it was a product of so minute specificity, you know, because if there was a pressure, without that specificity, it's hard to get a job teaching in college. To see, you know, I understand that pressure, but what a bore. After arguing with this friend, I gained frustration because after a while, what are you going to do, Alex? You know you can't take these people out for dinner because the dinner conversation is very reductive. It's very boring. So we would argue constantly back and forth until I was reminded by this wonderful Vietnamese proverb that my grandmother told me when I was a child. It says, when you argue with an intelligent person, you can't win. But when you argue with a stupid person, you can't stop. You know, so my idea was, okay, so this is a disaster. I can't continue to argue with these people. Yeah. You know, so why not create a paper where there's expertise, whatever they love, can be published. And over time, what I call crossover readership, it will spill over readership. So somebody who only interested in poetry and now beginning to read about art, the visual culture, and then some artists can read, you know, a book review or a dance, you know, review, and then be interested in that. So it's really, it has been taken us 25 years until now. It opened up this amazing rupture. Before Trump, it was 800,000 readership. Now it's 4 million. And I think there's a incredible deep interest in young people reading the rail. And also 40% is from Europe and Asia, which is interesting. We just got a grant from Bloomberg Philanthropy because we can no longer monitor the foot traffic.
Right.
It's so tremendous. So we have to hire a group of people outside whose really expertise lie on how to mobilize, archive, accessibility, and whatnot. So it's 25 years, it seems like a beginning, a new chapter that I think is going to be more effectively generous than it has been.
Yeah. I thought to ask, given this community, is anyone here connected to Meyer Schapiro, Lillian Schapiro?
Then,
What's the connection?
I was a student of Candy Brody, and Candy and his wife were both Meyer students.
So that's
Yes,
that
yes,
work in the corner there,
Yes.
jostling, you know,
is the wife, and she
with,
was a student of Meyer. She must have been 22 or 3 and moved to Florence. And when Candy was going to visit Florence, Meyer said, "Look up Jocelyn." And they got married. And I've heard a lot of personal stories about Meyer. And I met him a few times. But I think that the language that I got from the Brodies, there was a lot of Meyer in it. And I can iterate things that stick to my ribs that I know came through them from him. And he knew a lot about pictures, he knew a lot about art making.
yeah. Are you an artist as well? Yeah. Well, yeah, please.
I can talk to you later at the opening. I worked at Columbia in the art history department for 4 years as an undergraduate.
Okay,
And so got to know all the professors.
okay.
However, you know, I've met Meyer Schapiro, but didn't take any class. And after attending this, I regret that. But got a great interest in art history as a result.
Yeah.
Starting out as a mathematician, economist. So, but it was, why are you not at Columbia with this interest?
NYU had an offer and Columbia didn't. But I remember thinking when the NYU idea came up and it looked like I might be going, I remember thinking, I really feel more like I should be at Columbia because of the Meyer Schapiro, you know, loyalty. But I think it's fine. Yeah. I think it's fine. Yes.
I grew up with Meyer Schapiro.
Oh, good.
My father was David Rosand.
Oh, okay,
And,
great. I was going to mention David earlier.
So,
David
Yeah.
did?
David Roseanne's son.
Oh, wow.
I was going to mention David earlier, but please go ahead. Please go ahead.
So Meyer Schapiro was a household name, and he wrote a paper on the semiotics of the visual sign that my father shared with me when I was quite young, and it just captivated me. And
1968.
is that when it was published?
Yeah.
Yeah, the book is
Well,
right in there.
I was barely sentient in '68, but I remember when it was published finally in the collected papers in
Yeah.
'94 or '5 or '6.
Yeah.
And that was when I graduated from medical school. So I'm a neurologist, and one of the questions that I came here hoping that I could get an answer to is, to what degree did Meyer Schapiro spend time with neuroscientists? Because that paper, which is deceptively simple, I recommend it to everybody who wants to understand how you appreciate visual images, had so much neuroscience in it There were no references, or there are very few. And I don't think that some of what we've learned about the visual system and how art is, and the vertical and the horizontal are apprehended in the nervous system, I don't think that that was well worked out in 1968. I don't know that, but
So where was he getting it?
I think he was getting it from his own observations of himself as an observer and through conversations with artists and observers. And what, so he's been my hero ever since.
You should write an essay where you read him in light of recent discoveries in neuroscience.
Yeah, I would love to. Maybe when I retire. I mean, I think
You
I would
really
love
should.
to.
We'll publish it in the Rail.
Yeah, but I want to make
Yeah.
I want to make a few points about Meyer Schapiro, at least in my young memory, but also just how I've appreciated him over my lifetime. Number one is that he was curious about everything and everybody, and so the story you told, which I've never heard, about his really shaping the direction of your life, because he got to know you very quickly through your curiosity.
Yeah.
He was an immensely curious person.
Yes.
And he did that to my father as well.
Yeah.
My father wanted to be a painter, so he had the opposite treatment from Meyer Schapiro.
Yeah.
So then, and I'll leave with one question for the two of you, or for maybe for Phong. How might Meyer Schapiro have interacted with all of us, surrounded by these works? What do you think he would have been like had he been here on the stage?
Would be like me. You know, thank you for that comment, by the way. It's very important to point out that his deep reading of philosophy, as much as science, I think he read some scientific paper for sure, but the one of the most important philosophers for Meyer, around that time, was Giambattista Vico, who was known to be one of the first counter-enlightenment philosophers, who have this theory. It's called verum factum esse, meaning truth is what made, because the word factum, fact, in Latin factum, is made. It's something you claim when you made something. That's your truth. So I think that was very important. I think he might have discussed that with his friend Isaiah Berlin, who also have a deep interest in Vico, as he did with Herder. And the subject of freedom is super important, that friendship. As you know, when Isaiah Berlin wrote Two Concepts of Liberty, and that was 1953, that's a long time ago. And the idea of the hedgehog and the fox, that's another classic essay, probably written a little bit later, but nevertheless, it was included in the great volume, Russian Thinkers. That's 1975. Very important to remember how the Academy, I'm sure you can verify this, Alex, to some extent, they took it so seriously, that essay, The Hedgehog and the Fox. It's based on the Greek philosopher, poet, Achilles. One line that goes, the fox might know many things, but the hedgehog knows one big thing. And he went to give example from Plato all the way to Tolstoy would be the fox, and all the opposite would be Aristotle, all the way to Dostoevsky. There's in between this, Erasmus and Hegel and so on and so forth. But the idea is that the hedgehog are those who can conceive the world, be influenced many things, but they have to narrow down to one singular vision. Where the fox, to whom the world cannot be boiled down to one singular view. And I think the Academy took it seriously, the idea that you have to pursue one singular focus. And I have this discussion with Richard Serra, actually, in my first interview with him, when I asked whether you were a fox or the hedgehog. He said, well, up to you, what do you think? And I said, you are a hedgehog. But I should have said, you are a hedgehog who misses being the fox.
Well,
Because there's always that interesting overlap, interest. You know, you can say that our friend, the late Robert Ryman, great painter, is a great hedgehog from the get-go. The minute that he decided to be a painter, after having gone to New York City to pursue as jazz saxophonist, you know, and he discovered he had stage fright. That career ended, and having worked at MoMA as a guard for 10 years, each week will be a different rotation. So over 10 years, he absorbed a great deal looking at painting. And he discovered, you know, I can make painting like Malevich. I can make painting like Mondrian. There's no way I can do Picasso or Matisse. So that's what he did. He started out, limited himself, it's going to be square format and white paint. That's all he did his entire life. But never once he repeated the painting, right? The opposite of that would be Rosette Boyce. It's a classic fox. You know, he taught, he make drawing, he make performance, he make sculpture, and claim all kind of theories about his art. So mystical, so poetic. And so I don't know. I think that there's a sense where even one claim to be a fox might have aspiration to be the hedgehog. And vice versa. You can think with your body and you can feel with the mind. So I think that's where it lies my interest in understand my friends. You know, I mean, you could never understand anything about your artist friend or poet friend, creative friend, until you sit down and you talk to them. That's what the rail's about. You know, I remember Henry Lewis III, who was interested in buying the rail. We were very good friends before he died, and he wanted to help out. And I spent the whole weekend long at his lavish home in Fisher Island. And I remember he read the rail very carefully. He's going to buy it to support me. But I remember asking him, if you buy it, what would it look like? He said, it can't be freeform, there's no way. And the poems that appear in the rail, you shouldn't give it so much pages, for so much space, 4, 5 full pages. You should give them a tiny, whatever space they have, one poem like the New Yorker magazine would do. You know, and you know what else he say? Why so long the artist interview? Instead of 1,000 words, why 6,000, 7,000? Who reads it from? I say the artist, his or her family member, and 3 friends. That was it. You know? But I think I make him laugh, you know. But people like Hank, who's a genius, as you know, his father, who founded Life magazine, Time magazine, Fortune magazine. The father, Henry Lewis, really was one of those amazing self-made American story. Born in Shanghai, grew up with Cheng Shak, and from a missionary parents. And you remember in the editorial of February issue in Life magazine, 1941, coined the famous term, the American century. Basically predict that America would succeed the British Empire. And that December 7, Pearl Harbor was bombed. And that was it. He became the most important man besides George L. Kennan. Anyway, I don't mean to sidetrack into this rabbit hole.
But I'd like to address your question, in part because I think it illuminates Meyer Schapiro, and maybe even your father as well. But what I did, and it wasn't consciously trying to be like Meyer Schapiro, but what I did a moment ago, asking if there was anyone here who might be connected in the community, that's pure. That's his spirit right there. That's what he did art historically, if you will. Your father, David Roseanne, great historian of Renaissance art, much missed, met with me when I was thinking of going to graduate school. I can't resist, I have to tell you, because it involves Meyer Schapiro as well. We had a nice long, he gave me lots of time, and then walked me to the subway. Like, we talked the whole way out of his office and then down the road to where I needed to go to pick up the subway. And the whole time while we walked, he told me his personal story about facing that choice between becoming an artist and becoming an art historian. And he said, and Meyer Schapiro told me it wasn't a problem, I could be both. And that's when we arrived at the subway station, and he said, it was the only thing Meyer ever said that was wrong. And then he walked away. Because your father couldn't keep being an artist, he said. He just had to, once he took the path of scholarship, that was it. But I think it informed his work, having been an artist, knowing how easy it is to make something terrible, I think is a great lesson that every art historian should learn from having tried to make art.
Yeah.
But also his sense of touch, materiality, the brushstroke, the drawing stroke as well.
For those of you guys who haven't read David Roseanne, the first book I would recommend is On T-shirt, published by Harry Abram. It's a great concise book where all the great paintings on the left, lavish reproduction, on the right is a wonderful text. I read that in college, 1982. And then later I met your father, and he was on the board of Dallas Foundation, among other people like Jack Flam, John Elderfield, and they were the first to support the rail. Laurie Aston was one time on the board as well. Other questions, you guys? What do you think?
I mean, please feel free to ask questions or even just point to specific works, because I've gotten to go through the show just now over the last hour or two, and I want you to be able to have something of that experience of, learning about why something is here and who these people were, and please.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, I'm just going to interrupt. I'll hand you the microphone if you're going to ask questions, if you don't mind.
I'll try not to sing. So I've seen the show many times. I've listened to all your talks. I'm a little bit of a fangirl. I love this show here. I'm really going to miss it when it goes. But what I'm really curious is, I want to know about all the art, that Meyer Shapiro's art, and the pieces that are there assembled on the wall that have relationship to his art. And I understand there's a piece by his wife as well.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear about that, please.
Well, I met Meyer, as I say, from the beginning in May 1986. So thereafter would be a weekly ritual. And over the years, Meyer always looked at my work. And sometimes we traded it. But most of the time, he always wanted me to have some of his works, because I think I appreciated his own work. And so oftentimes, almost like every time I visit, he would give me something to take home with. So that is probably a good selection. Many I have was destroyed by Hurricane Sandy, Superstorm Sandy, along with my 25 years of work. But that's what survived. That actually is in my bedroom. It's almost like a shrine, really. I wake up with it, and as Alex say about Asian people in general, are those people who have reverence for their elderly. And so they became my surrogate grandparents in a way. My grandmother was very wise. My beloved grandmother, who once said something very profound when I was 10. She said, when you grow up, grandson, you will suffer like anyone else on this face of the earth. Don't ever once think that your suffering is more unique than theirs, but make sure you suffer the right way. And it stayed with me forever. And to this day, I don't know what that meant, right way, but I know you gotta trust it. Let it, let it go. Surrender to what you love, because that's all you know is what you love. And you can't really make anything truthfully as your own mark or making without love. And I think you mentioned about sense of touch. That was very important to Meyer. I mean, the humanity is in the touch. I remember my late friend, the great theatrical director Peter Brook, who once said something similar. He said, of all the dictionary in the word touch has a similar meaning. It's the moment you encounter a work of art when you say, wow. You be in touch. And I think that's something that he consistently explored throughout his life. And it's not just political, even though he was political, whether becoming the young socialist leader at the age of 14, became part of the member of the Communist Party before the Moscow trial, and then became a Marxist throughout his life, and very depressed at the failure of socialism. But it's always that sense of touch that's consistent through his mediation on looking to recognize the making, and then from there on, it has to be the response from it. That's why when Alex talked about Romanesque sculpture and architecture, these artisans, they didn't have authorship. Don't forget, authorship only occurred in the beginning of the Renaissance. Before that, there's artisan. And he had the same admiration for them as though who was famously known artist with a Titian or whoever else later in life, So that's the part of his view of the making that I also very much am admire of. And I think that's very important to the progressive education, which is something that his professor, John Dewey, have also elevated through the philosophy of pragmatism. The philosophy of pragmatism really came out from William James and Charles Sanders Peirce, but it's really Dewey who make it more popularized in a way, particularly when he left University of Chicago and came to Columbia and taught there till the end of his retirement. But when you think about progressive education, it's really more about the balance between the artisan's skill and the artist's knowledge. It has to be maintained the two. Right now, the working handyman, the so-called people with vocational skill and higher pursuit in education and artists, is no longer the same treatment. We are looking, they have been undermined. It's not great. It has to be a nice balance between the two, But I think we might get back to that. I really have terrific optimism. I really do.
He wrote an essay about, I think it's called On the Aesthetic Sensibility in Romanesque Art, where he tried to discern, given a context where artists did not have a lot of agency, they didn't choose the subject matter, they were, given all kinds of parameters for the work, he goes in and finds the places in the art where you can see the artists developing a sense of agency, of some autonomy, of an aesthetic sensibility that is maybe at times congruent with the theological and ritual functions of the art, and maybe at times not.
Yeah.
Like that's what he went in for. One of the great things about Meyer Shapiro's work, and I think it's a lesson just in general, is when he talks about a work, he's not there to tell you how it all works perfectly, how it serves, the function that it's meant to serve, and here are the theological texts that it perfectly is conveying. He's always after what's unresolved in the work. Where is the conflict in the work? What are the elements in the work that are going to, where the unconscious is at work?
Yeah.
He was always psychoanalytically interested, never a dogmatist about psychoanalysis, but it motivates his work. It's always there, it's at work.
Yeah.
And he felt it was always at work at some level, these unresolved understandings of things. That is extremely rare in art history. Most of the time what you get are stories of things working,
Yeah. Yeah.
This is an example of abstract expressionism.
Yeah, I was talking to Alex earlier about whenever maybe the chance to recreate the similar show, different version, I would have loved to have the chance to include, for example, the Kunin Woman One. When he's made it in 1952, he worked on that painting more than a year, and the painting was rolled up, about to be thrown out. And he ran into Meyer on the street in the village, and he looked rather depressed. And Meyer said to him, "Are you doing okay, Bill?" He said, "No, I've been working like a dog, very depressed, and this one painting, about to throw it out." And he said, "Would you like me to look at it before you throw it out?" He said, "Sure." So he took Meyer back to his studio on East 10th Street, and he bring it out, roll up the painting, put it up on the wall. In a typical Shapiro-like manner, he didn't say a word for a good 15 minutes. Would you believe it? The Kunin told me this, by the way. It's a famous story, but he told me this. And he was very anxious, What am I going to say? And he finally said, "This is the best painting you ever made." Why? Because you were trained in a figurative tradition, traditionally trained in atelier manner. You love the figure, but you also are interested in abstraction, like the rest of your colleagues were doing. What you're doing here is to put two elements together. They collide in and they create amazing friction that I have not seen among your peers. I think this is the best painting you do. What I would suggest is don't do anything else. Just sign it and take many other canvases, make a whole series out of it, and see how long that lasts. Because there's the continuum in your gestural anarchy that it can be panned out differently. And that was it. So he went on to paint 8 more versions, and he had his show a year after at Sydney Janus, 1953. And you know what? No painting was sold. The Kunin was born 1904, so that 53 make him what, Alex? 40... 45, 46. I mean, that's all growing up. His reputation was well respected, known.
Yeah.
He had to go back to be a house painter. Would you believe it?
He was unfazed. Someone who was more of a modernist would have felt like it was a no-no, of course.
Yeah.
But he
Greenberg hated it.
He was a medievalist. He abstraction and figuration on the same surface, no problem. This happens all the time.
Yeah.
He had a wider view of what was possible.
Yeah. I also appreciate that he discovered no reviews. Well, there was a nasty review, but no sale of the work, and the show ended. I think either he wrote or called Alfred Barr, and he complained this is one of our greatest painter, living painter, and it's so incredibly shameful that no museum purchased the work. Alfred bought us over the next day, and both women won for the MoMA. You know, so he doesn't think like that. He's sneaky. You know, he held written letter recommendation, all kind of people. So he's deeply generous, and so I'm learning a lot. You know, because the psychology, benevolent or empathy, is something you must learn. You're not born with it. I hate to say this about humanity. So I'm just lucky to have known both of them, who taught me a great deal about what it's like to be human, what it's like to belong and part of the community, and not reduce yourself into a certain category. You know.
Seems like a pretty good note to end on, I would say. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. So it's more than 10 people.
Thank you, Phong. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, everyone. Please we're going to start cleaning up and putting away chairs and things, but please feel free to stick around a little bit longer and chat. Phong, this has been an incredible gift, not only tonight, but this exhibition as a whole. And tonight it really feels like you two conjured Meyer himself and really brought him here among us. And what a treat for us. Thank you so much.
Of course.